Sorry.
All right, we're live. Thank you for coming back and seeing us again. So let me scroll all the way up because that happened. So hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. While we said three, unfortunately, it's just going to be us today because Nick Garber is out saving the world from ET and such, as you do for Border Patrol. And
He's not tripping on his feet again.
This is true. He didn't trip on his own 2 feet today. Elvis doesn't like it either. All right. So, Davis, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself to the viewers and listeners?
Hi, I'm Davis Ashura. I write books for fun on the side when I'm not doing my real job. And so far, I've written 10 books. They're epic fantasy for the most part. And a lot of my Indian heritage is, at least what I understand of my Indian heritage, has influenced my writing, and it's been fun, and the reception has been cool, so I've enjoyed it. And if I didn't, I probably would have quit because it takes a lot of time to do it.
Yeah, that was how Cisca sold me on getting one of your books when they had it on a special for Audible. She's like, you have to buy this or else, because it's not just boring European fantasy over and over again.
Yeah,
I think the or else was there, though.
No. Or else was, I will send you the money, just go buy the book.
So Nick and I heard the or else. I don't know what you heard, but we heard the or else. So the next part of the introduction, dear listener and viewers, is how we first found them. So I actually found Davis when I was looking for authors to do interviews on my blog when I first started writing back in 2016. Man, it's been a while. And he was kind enough to actually answer, which I didn't get a lot of those. So, and then I've sort of always been meaning to get around to his books. And now that she made me, I've started listening to This Is Me and Elvis agrees.
I have good taste. So, I actually met Davis through Dragon Con and running the fantasy literature department there. And I blindly put him on a couple of panels, not really knowing your work. And you did a fabulous job. And we got to talking afterwards and between panels. And you're a great person and an amazing writer. So,
well, thank you. Appreciate that. I'll take both of those compliments. I'm not sure I earned them, but I'll take them anyway.
Well, I've enjoyed it every time I've read one of your books. So now we get on to religion, and I think I might be able to guess these, but I want to know for sure. So Star Trek, Star Wars, or Firefly?
Well, you can see the Serenity right there. So,
yeah.
Firefly. I mean, I've got a little Starfleet thing on the other side, but right next to it is another Serenity. And I've got Malcolm Reynolds' gun on my fireplace mantle.
Nice.
The damn cat must have kicked it off. I had a Serenity on the mantle also, but yeah, it's definitely Firefly.
And then
who needs Chekhov's gun when you've got Mal's gun?
What?
I said, who needs Chekhov's gun when you have Mal's gun?
Exactly.
So we have now it's Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, or Harry Potter.
Lord of the Rings.
I figured.
That was an easy one because, I'm older than a lot of people, and so you go with what formed you as a young person and as a kid, and that was definitely Lord of the Rings. So I imagine if I was 30 or something, my choice might be Harry Potter or Game of Thrones. I'm not sure which one, but it's Lord of the Rings.
I can understand that. So, because we love both the science fiction and the fantasy, but which one was your first love that you came to?
Science fiction, for sure. Well, maybe fantasy. So, it's a funny story. Well, it's funny to me. But when I came here to the country, I wasn't born in America. I was born in India. And so I came here when I was 3.5. And it took me a couple of years, actually, to actually know what city I lived in because I didn't speak the language. And it's kind of traumatic moving over here. But anyway, one of the things that struck me was there's this boy in a school bus, and nobody ever bothered him. and he was always reading a Hardy Boys mystery. And so I don't know if Hardy Boys counts as sci-fi or fantasy. I know it's mystery, but Frank and Joe solved like 200 mysteries between Frank's junior and senior year and Joe's sophomore and junior year. I mean, I don't know when their summer vacation ended, but there must have been some sort of,
There had to be some sort of fantasy to do that many mysteries.
Yes, exactly. So maybe it's a combination of science fiction and fantasy. But the books that I remember reading first were Arthur C. Clarke.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, it was The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings.
That's awesome. So would you say that's your first memory of kind of engaging in science fiction and fantasy as a genre?
Yeah, I'd say so. So I read the Hardy Boys, because they're science fiction and fantasy, and they're definitely fantasy because Frank and Joe had their own cars and they got to drive their dad's boat to sleep, and I still remember all those things. So what kid wouldn't want that? But I read a bunch of Greek and Norse mysteries, and then somehow from that I stumbled upon a book called Dolphin Island by Arthur C. Clarke.
Okay.
And then the next book I read was The City and the Stars. And from there, it was just, I took off and I read everything I could that was science fiction.
Yes, that's awesome. Yes, JR, your question is next.
All right. So how did your love of science fiction and fantasy genres transitioning into you writing the fantasy novels that you're known and loved for?
So eventually I sort of, I've always loved science fiction. I still love it, but my science fiction is rockets and space exploration. It's not, a phone that happens to let you surf the internet and have social media stuff. That's not my sci-fi. So I'm still waiting for my sci-fi to really show up. But that's what I always loved. But somehow I started reading Lord of the Rings, and then I read everything. I read the Shannara series. I read Thomas Covenant. I read Wheel of Time, and those kind of just sunk into me. And when you read a lot, I think you kind of want to be a writer also. And so I could have written sci-fi, I guess, but I eventually fell in love with fantasy more than sci-fi, and that's what I wanted to write, was those kind of stories.
Fair enough. So many authors let their own sort of real-life experiences influence the stories they tell. So is there any specific formidable moment for you that shapes you as a storyteller?
Yeah, I'd say so. I wanted to write, I wanted to read books with people that look like me, first of all. And so there weren't a lot when I first started publishing. There are a lot more now, a lot more fantasy novels set outside Western Europe. Most of them are young adult, which isn't really a fair characterization, so I don't think they're young adult. That's just how they market it. I think they're just as adult as anything else. But they weren't around when I was getting ready to publish, and I wanted to read those kind of stories about my culture as I know it. And I keep saying as I know it because I'm from India, but I was raised in America, so I have a different perspective on my Indian heritage than somebody who is from India and raised in India. They'd have a very different perspective of it than I would. So I don't want to make it seem like that's exactly what I do. But in terms of lightning bolts, I'd say when I read David Eddings' book, that's when I really knew I wanted to be a writer. But I was 14 or 15, and then other things got in the way before I could really put my fingers on the keyboard and start writing. And then when I moved to North Carolina in 2003, the job that I still have, it was kind of slow the first 6 months, and so I wrote a terrible book, and the bug just got me there at that point, and then I had to set it aside. But eventually, I got back to it in 2008, and here we are.
So transitioning a bit away from writing, but what have you had any really cool fan art or cosplays of any of your characters yet?
I have not had fan art or cosplay, but I'll take the 2 pets that were named after my characters over the fan art or cosplay.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's a beautiful German Shepherd mix named after Rook. And then a cat named Aya. I have a cat named Aya in one of the stories. So I'll take those 2 any day of the week.
One second. So have you had anybody ask for your autograph out in public yet?
Yes, and it was kind of funny because it was at the first Dragon Con. And if anyone's ever been to Dragon Con, it's like all of your nerd heroes are there, at least as far as authors are concerned. When they're just walking around, I mean, it was kind of surreal to me to just be, rubbing shoulders with Naomi Novik. And then in this particular thing, though, I saw this gentleman with a cane walking by, and he had a Manticore and Star uniform on. And I thought, is that David Weber? And it was. And so I must have bet David Weber's ear for about 30 minutes. And, he was just sitting there. He was kind as could be, just talking to me. And there's another person standing behind me, and I thought, oh gosh, I'm hogging David Weber's time. And so I said, I'm sorry, I'll get out of your way now. So I got out of David Weber's hair, and the other person talked to David Weber for about 30 seconds. Then he circled back around to me, saw me wearing this T-shirt or this sweatshirt. He said, "Are you Davis Ashura?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Oh, I love your books. I'm such a big fan. I listen to him as a truck driver. I listen to him all the time on the road." So that was just such a thrill that he wasn't waiting for David Weber. He was waiting for me. So that was really cool.
That is awesome. So
I had a spare book. He didn't have a book of mine in his pocket because he listens to audiobooks, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had one, and so I gave it to him.
That's awesome.
Yeah, your audiobooks are really well done, but I'm biased, and Nick Fidel's one of my favorite narrators. So
Nick is pretty wonderful. So we're all biased for Nick.
So,
Did you get to pick him as the narrator, or is that what your publisher gave you?
Odd story. I begged Nick. I don't know if I begged Nick is the right word, but I just had my. So I'm indie published my ebooks, and somebody convinced me to maybe give audiobooks a try, and I didn't bother asking whether Audible Studios or Podium wanted to pick it. Sorry about the echo, by the way. So I emailed him and I asked him, "Would you like to narrate my book?" It's as simple as that. I just emailed him. And Nick said, "Sure, this is how much it costs." And I said, "Well, there goes the profits from my second book in the ebook market." So I hired Nick to do it. And
We've got a little visitor.
nice.
over Doc's shoulders. So I hired Nick to do the first one. The book did phenomenal. Then I hired him to do the second one. Then since that time, I've had publishers publish my audiobooks for me, and I've always asked that Nick be the narrator because why not? Why would you not want him?
Well, he does the pronunciations really well, and he does, and it's also very consistent.
Yeah, and the best part of publishing for me is the hour-long conversation I get to have with Nick, which I didn't realize it was so unique, but a lot of my friends, who have done really well, even who have Nick as their narrator, all they do is send a spreadsheet with pronunciation, guides on it. And that's it. That's their interaction with Nick. Whereas Nick texts me and says, "Do you have a minute to go over all the pronunciations? When can we talk?" And so I get to spend an hour with Nick Fidel with each of my books, going over pronunciations and characters and motivations and stuff like that. So I haven't heard of anybody else who gets to do that. So I'm kind of special that way, I guess.
So do you actually have pronunciations in mind when you're writing? Because I tend to never like I'm an open book. If they want to pronounce other than the certain words like corpsman or adjutant or whatever, like words that are topical, like as far as names and stuff, I'm like, sure, if that's how you think it sounds. So,
I don't have characters' voices strongly in my head when I'm writing. I know how the words are pronounced. And then when Nick gets a hold of me, then I'm forced to really consider how they're talking. And so I didn't want the dwarves in my... So the current series that I'm working on is my love letter to Wheel of Time and Lord of the Rings. So there's a lot of influences from those two that series in my book, including dwarves and elves of the Tolkien sort. But I didn't want my dwarves to sound like Scots. So they don't, I hope.
No, I think that they really do. I like your dwarves. They fit some of the stereotypes, but they're different enough that they are unique to you. Does that make sense?
Yes. So, I like the stereotypes so that people could lock onto them. But man, do you really want another Gimli? I mean, Gimli's great, but I don't think you need another Tolkien as dwarf and Tolkien as elves. I only have one take on it. So, but when I was talking to Nick, I had to think, what do these dwarves talk? And Nick was getting a little bit bored with me. He's like, does every character have to have a Midwestern American accent? Can't we do something else? And I said, well, what do you have in mind? Can you do accents? And he just went into
They can do great accents.
And so I heard that and I said, can you do Texas? He can do Texas also. And so that's how some of those accents came about, is because Nick was getting bored with me, saying, well, he's got a deep voice. She's got a contralto, a commanding voice. Do they all sound the same in terms of their accent? I don't know. Do they? Can't we do something fun with them? So that's kind of how it came about.
We had another author on, Robert Ross, who works with Nick Podell also, and he said that one of his favorite things is to try and find something that really breaks Nick.
I was in the virtual Dragon Con, I guess in 2020 with Robert and Nick. We had a con together, or a panel together. I mean.
Yeah, it was a fun panel. But yeah, poor Nick.
Echo was in that one too.
So, so I was going to ask what the funniest story of fan interaction.
You were going to ask him about let me pull up the number for you. We're on number 14.
14.
14. Have you ever spotted your books in the wild?
I wish. I mean, I guess at Dragon Con you kind of do.
Didn't you tell me you spotted one of them at your local bean shop? Coffee shop.
I gave them that. I mean, it wasn't that it was spontaneous. I said, can you guys stock this and sell this? And I said, sure, why not? You're a local author and you're always here writing and drinking our coffee, so you put that in place. I've been recognized at Dragon Con, and I don't think anybody had my book, but they did talk my ear off about the book, so that was pretty cool. I didn't really talk my ear off, but when you don't expect anyone to notice you and somebody does, it feels like, wow, somebody noticed me. And they just see my little name down and like, I read your book, and that's just pretty cool.
I am sure that's a wonderful feeling. I really am. I'm not sure how to. Do you have any funny story that could top the David? The fan was waiting for you over David. JR, did you say something?
No, I was about to ask for you because you froze for a second.
Oh, sorry.
So you're asking if there's any funny stories that could top the waiting for David Weber, but actually waiting for me?
Mm-hmm. I love that story.
That's my absolute favorite. I mean, this was 2018 Con, and so David Weber has been a legend for 25 years, and so to have that on my resume as a list of cool stories that I can tell people, I just love that story. It's fantastic. I don't have anything.
All right. Well, sometimes you can't beat perfection, so we'll move on. So this is the part of the interview where we ask you to tell us the highlights reel of what you've written.
Oh my gosh, are you serious? I got to do that?
I mean, you could just tell us the various series that you've written.
So I've written, the first series I wrote was called The Castle in the Outcast. It's a 3-book epic fantasy. And then I wrote what started out as an urban fantasy, Chronicles of William Wilde. They're shorter books, but they're actually equal. The series is equal in length to Castle in the Outcast. There's 5 books in it. The first book I wrote for my teenage sons because I wanted to get them to read something because they don't read. They do a lot. They do a lot of reading now, but it's not epic fantasy. My oldest son reads movie screenplays, and my youngest reads philosophy texts, which is like, he's 16 years old and he's reading philosophy texts. But whatever. Anyway,
good for him. Marcus Aurelius is a good one.
What's that?
I said, give Marcus Aurelius. He'll be busy for hours.
He already read it, but he's already read that. But I wrote the first book for my teenage sons, and the inner epic physicist in me just couldn't hold back, and eventually I turned William Wilde from a straight-ahead young adult urban fantasy into a pure epic fantasy. And while I was writing, the weirdest thing happened. In the first chapter, William is high school, which is based on my own high school, except it was co-edited when he was in that guy's Jesuit high school. He sees this girl, and a character from the Outcast decided that's me. I thought, how in the world did you get they're not from it? But she insisted, that's me. Don't kick me out. So suddenly, we had to merge, the workings of the Cats and the Outcast into it. And then they decided to see another world. And, so now we've got this convoluted set of books. I've written 10, and they're all linked together now. And it's called the Anchored World. So I get to link 3 timelines, 3 different magic systems, and all these characters, and not contradict myself.
That's an impressive thing. So while all of those series that are now linked together sound fascinating, today we want to talk about A Testament of Steel, an Anchored Worlds novel, which is the first book of your Instrument of Omen series. So where did you get the premise for this universe? How did you come up with the idea? Was it psychedelics, Ouija board, too much laughing gas at your day job?
I don't have enough laughing gas at day job. But let me see, Instrument of Omens. The series title came from Thundercats. So I wanted something that sounded really cool as a title, something that would hook the reader. And, Lionel wields the Sword of Omens. And so I thought, that's kind of a cool name, Sword of Omens. What could I do with it? So that's where the series title comes from, is Thundercats. But as far as the series itself is concerned, that actually, not a big chunk, but part of it actually comes from the ending of William Wilde, because some of the characters in Instrument of Omens start showing up in book 3 of William Wilde, and then as the series progresses towards books 4 and 5, they take on bigger roles. And so this is really a different aspect of some of what happens in William Wilde, and also continuing on with their story. So it was just a natural jumping off point from William Wilde, I guess you would say.
Okay. So before we dive into the story itself, let's take a second and talk about that glorious cover. So can you tell us a little bit about this glorious piece of art and how you came up with it?
I gave my artist a brief, and that's what he came up with. So I've worked with this artist with the 3 Cats and the Outcast covers. I had somebody else do the William Wilde covers. But then for Testament of Steel, I went back to Andreas. He's from a Greek isle. I think it's called Naxos. And I just sent him a brief, and I said, "This is what he looks like. This is what he's doing. You've drawn him before for the cast in the Outcast." And that's what he came up with. And the moment he sent me the initial uh, rendering, that's just really cool. I love that. So anyway, that's how he came up with it. So the sword is pretty much the same sword as from book 1 of Cast and the Outcasts, and the character is pretty much the same character. He looks the same, tough, cool, and pretty badass, and I love him.
So I also like the way you did the text on the thing. It sort of pops that way with that silver. But the symbol between your first and your last name, what is that? Is that just your brand logo, or is it significant?
It's my brand logo. It's got 7 branches, and in the Cast and the Outcast, the main character's father talks about how he thinks humanity is a tree with 7 branches because there are 7 castes. And each branch feeds the trunk of humanity. And I'm going to do that symbol for me, and so I've just decided that's what it's going to be.
Works for me. It's a nice logo. It looked almost like the Tree of Life, but I'm looking at a smaller version.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's that kind of symbol. You'll actually see it a lot in a lot of places, just in metalworking and woodworking. That one is just unique to my world because of the 7 branches and the way it looks. I think it's cool.
All right, the next one is you, Doc.
So what would your 30-second elevator pitch for this novel be?
Your Testament?
Yes, sir.
Oh my, 30-second elevator pitch. Let me think of this. This is hard. A love letter to Wheel of Time and Lord of the Rings, inspired by India's culture, with a character who knows that. Oh God, that's so hard. Let me circle back to that because I know I've got a better one than what I just said. Because that's terrible. That's awful. I think a person would fall asleep at like the 10-second mark. Isn't a 30-second elevator pitch supposed to be like, exciting and stuff? That was not exciting.
Close enough. We'll accept it. It's good enough for government work.
Good enough then.
You did better than some of that we've had doing them. So what is it that makes your series special Tolkien's influenced so many, but I can tell you what makes it special, but you tell us.
So I think this boils to what I'm trying to write. I'm not interested in writing grimdark. I know people love grimdark, but I'm interested in writing about people who genuinely are striving to be heroes. And so those are the characters that started what I wanted to demonstrate is people that have flaws but are still always striving to do good, not just accidentally doing good and mostly doing bad. And they're not perfect. They're growing constantly, but they're growing in a good way. And so that was the genesis of what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to write about these people that, you would love to have them over for dinner or go to have a beer with them because they're fun and they're good people. But, if crap hits the fan at the bar, they'd also be the ones that would kick some ass and have no trouble doing it. So, it's that interesting meld between, being kind, but also being unwilling to take somebody else's crap. So that's the genesis of it. But in terms of what I think makes it special is it's not Western Europe, which, like I said, is not as common as it used to be. There are a lot more different cultures being pulled in. But it is unique in how it does portray some of the Indian aspects, and I'm not afraid to still pull in Western aspects. But that's what I would say makes it unique. And it's also kind of the writing. Some people get on my writing as being too ornate. That was intentional. It's not because I can't write in a more simple, direct fashion, but I wrote the series in that fashion because the characters are also intelligent. I didn't want them to come off as dullards. This is how they perceive the world. They perceive the world with words that make sense.
That's a good answer.
I mean, I'm a huge.
Doc, you muted yourself.
Sorry. It is a very descriptive world, and it normally leaves me craving Indian food. But what tropes do you think A Testament of Steel hits on best within the science fiction fantasy tropes?
It's a coming-of-age story, obviously, because my main character wakes up at the bottom of a well and has no memory of himself. I mean, it actually starts a little sooner than that. But in essence, that's who Cindershade is a young boy who wakes up in the bottom of the well, has no memory of his life, is crippled, and is from a small village where his brother can't afford to feed him. And so he's sent to live at an orphanage. So it's a found family story. And of course, he then goes to a military academy. So you have the coming of age, the destined hero, the found family, and the military academy tropes. And of course, Cinder, you can see what he becomes on the cover. He's not club-footed or weak. He looks pretty powerful and strong. And so he's a person of destiny. But if you've read my other books, you understand that Cinder earns his destiny. It wasn't given to him. He has to outwork everyone to become who he is, because he's really trying to recover who he was.
That's a very unique way to start a story. Everyone seems to want to start fantasy stories in a bar, and I'm all for a good bar, don't get me wrong, but you don't last in the infantry if you're not. But I like when people get creative and start other places as a way to start a story. I've never heard of anyone starting in a well before. That definitely is Shades of Lassie, and I approve.
No, that was shades of me. I fell into a well when I was 2 years old and almost drowned. And my grandfather, this was in India. I was either 2 or 1, I don't remember. Because all I know is my mom said she looked over at me and she saw me leaning further and further, and down I went. And so my grandfather had to go pull me out of the well. Otherwise I would probably be in. So that's actually where it came from.
That's even cooler than Lassie.
Kind of is, isn't it?
I'm just picturing how freaked out your mother was. So, because children, I think, are meant to scare the daylights out of their parents. So what subgenres do you think that this particularly fits well into?
So I think it fits into general fantasy. And then if you break that down, definitely epic fantasy, military fantasy, coming of age, sword and sorcery, and eventually dragons.
So we all know I'm biased and I love dragons, so that makes me happy. But okay. Now on to the story itself. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the main character, Cindershade? I know you glossed on him a little bit, but tell us.
So the story, I really wanted to write a tightly focused story about Cinder. I think, you can go epic fantasy a lot of different ways. Like Wheel of Time obviously has a massive cast of characters. Game of Thrones has a massive cast of characters. I wanted a tightly focused fantasy where most of the point of view is just locked into Cinder. And so Cinder starts out as a young man. Like I said, he has no memory of himself. He's got complete amnesia. He goes to an orphanage in the capital city, But Cinder is always driven to do not necessarily what's right, because that makes him sound too Gary Stu, but just to help in ways that he can for those who can't. That's just something that is inborn in him. And some would call that being a hero. That's just Cinder. And he learns a little bit more about what makes himself tick. And so he comes to realize that the thing that he really wants to do is protect people. And the best way that he knows to protect people is as a warrior. And, it's not just being a warrior. It's, to protect a person, you can protect them as a physician, as a healer, even as a lawyer. But Cinder's way of protecting people is as a warrior. And so he joins a military academy in a school, and then from there it goes on to the Elven Military Academy, which is the highest one in the entire world, where he meets a woman, an Elven princess, who, he recognizes her, and she recognizes him, and they shouldn't recognize each other. But, of course they're going to recognize each other because they know each other, they just don't remember it. She doesn't remember her past either. And so that's where the story springs off from.
Do you go all, Luke, I'm your sister?
They're not brother and sister.
Okay, good.
It would be terrible if they were brother and sister.
All right, perfect.
They don't remember their past life, their life past the death in this world that they're living in. And the elves are arrogant. They're supposed to be arrogant. She's supposed to not have anything to do with him, and she generally doesn't have a lot to do with him except to train him. But it's not all maudlin, and they don't just fall into each other's arms. They got to earn everything that they got. They're not given anything. They have to earn their skills, and whatever happens to them as friends, they have to be willing to sacrifice things to be friends.
It's a good answer. So you talked about the main character. Were there any secondary characters that you find especially memorable that you enjoyed interacting with in your story world?
Well, the princess is named Anya, and she of course has a different name in some of the different series, but I love Anya. The first military school that Cinder goes to, they're trained in the sword, but there were 4 main characters in there. They were based off MMA fighters in the UFC. And so there's one named Grunt St. Peace, and he's based off George St. Pierre. And George is from Quebec, Canada, so when he speaks English, he speaks it with a little bit of an accent like this, and it's like pitched. And so Grunt has a bit of an accent. I never describe him as speaking like George, but he just has a bit of an accent. And the way they fight is similar to George. George has been undefeated for years, but he hasn't finished anyone except Michael Bisping. But generally, he just takes the distance. And some people say it's because George is unwilling to really engage and risk himself, whatever. When you step into the octagon, you're willing to risk and engage. But, those were the inspiration for those characters. Is what if MMA fighters really were in an epic fantasy novel, and these were the MMA fighters? So there was Johnny Bones Jones, Daniel Cormier, Michael Bisping, and George St. Pierre. Those were the inspirations. So their names are not the same at all, and their behavior is not the same at all, except Daniel looks like the character a little bit. I just had a lot of fun with it. Hopefully those guys have seen how I portrayed them, because it's with a lot of love.
So you've mentioned the secondary characters. What about bad guys? Were there any bad guys your characters had to encounter without giving any spoilers?
There's spiders. There's
okay.
God. And then, have y'all ever watched Babylon 5?
I have.
So you know how crap is constantly happening, but all politics is still there.
Yeah.
We're about to be destroyed. We're already arguing about politics, but they still are. I wanted to incorporate that in the bigger wars that are coming up in books 3 onward. And so it's not just the good guys that have political wars, it's also the bad guys that are going to have political wars that make no sense at all. But I think it'll be interesting. And so those characters are going to be fun to write. I haven't gotten to them yet. But the elves, all of them have been fun to write just because they're such general dicks. And it's just a lot of fun writing those guys because they're unrepentant about it, and I enjoy that.
Who wouldn't? So, you've put your character through a lot of stuff. Not all of it was very pleasant. So, if they ever appeared in our world and they met you and they knew you were the author who tormented them so in a back alley, how do you think that would fare for you?
Well, they can hurt me 20 different ways to Sunday without even touching me, because they got magic and stuff. But they also know that I'm weak, and so they wouldn't really hurt me. But they might give me a stern talking to. They might give me harsh language, but hopefully that would be the extent of it.
That beats homicidal rage any day. It's harsh language.
Yes.
All right. So sometimes, as authors, when you're writing, there are scenes that just don't quite make the cut. The story goes a different direction. So were there any scenes that were particularly memorable for you when you were writing this that didn't survive the editing process that you keep thinking, man, I'd like to find a way to use this?
Yeah, and in William Wire, there were a couple of scenes with these with 2 of my older characters who decide to get married, so that they were on the cutting room floor. And in Memories of Prophecies, there was a scene where the elven prince, shoves people out of the way to get to a rope swing, not realizing that he's about to go dashing off the cliff, let go of the rope, and fall into an ice-cold pond. He just thinks it's a pond, doesn't realize it's ice cold. And so that hit the cutting room floor just because it didn't make sense. There was no place to put it, but I get a chuckle out of it whenever I think about it. Just thinking of him flying through the air like Tarzan and then hitting the water. But that didn't make the final cut. And I think there was maybe one other scene like that also.
That's what newsletters are for. You can give them as the bonus bloopers.
That's true. Yeah, it's a bonus blooper. Will Wright does that with his Cradle series. He's got these bloopers at the end of his books all the time. And they're hysterical.
So finally, in most worlds that we love to engage in, the universe itself is almost as much of a character as the protagonist and the antagonist. So what can you tell us about the world where these stories occur?
The Cast and the Outcast is a broken world. It takes place on 2 continents. And it suffered an apocalypse 2,000 years ago, 2 apocalypse where well over 90% of the world's civilization was destroyed in a single night, but it was actually longer than that. And they're still undergoing that apocalypse because whatever destroyed the world 2 millennia ago is still trying to destroy the world. But the thing about the world that remains is that while everyone is segregated into these tight castes, they somehow make the civilization not unbearable. The world itself, the cities themselves, are beautiful places. They're generally at peace. There's not a lot of crime. Women are honored. They're not honored because, oh gosh, let's honor women. It's because that's just the expectation of the culture, that women are equal. It's the default setting, so to speak, not that they had to fight for anything. That's just the way it is. And so it's in some ways it's better than what we have, even though they have those tight casts. And so I wanted to sort of, marry the notion of the ugliness of the caste system with the civilization that we would all applaud in a lot of ways. William Wallace takes place on our planet, but the most of the story eventually takes place on an island out in the middle of the South Pacific. But if I could go anywhere in anything that I've ever read or written, that would be where I'd want to live, is that island in the South Pacific. And then Seminole, the third world that I've created, it's a single continent, a landmass the size of Earth, but in a single continent. And there are lots of massive empires, mostly run by the elves, and some by humans and some by dwarves. But they're conflicted because the elves were not created to be imperial rulers. They were supposed to preserve nature, just like classic elves are supposed to do. Dwarves are not supposed to be warlike people. They're supposed to have provided solace and empathy for those who are hurting. And so they're very much going against their natural natures in what they've done, but they've had to do it in order to survive. And so the worlds do have their own sort of, of course they exist for thousands of years, so there's lots of history and lore to these places. And so yeah, the worlds have their own characters. Or it has its own characterization. At least I hope they do.
Okay, so A Testament of Steel is clearly part of a series. We know because it says so on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. So there are currently 2 books out in this series, but is their story done? Will there be more from these characters? Where do you see this series going next?
So there's probably going to be about 7 books. That's what I've always planned for. That's what I always told myself in my head. Whether I manage 7 or 6, I don't know. Maybe 8. I don't know, but 7 is the magic number that I'm shooting for. I'm in the middle of book 3 right now. And probably by middle of May, I'll be 50% of the way done with book 3. With pretty heavy editing for the 50% that I've done, so it's coming along. Whether it's good or not, that's always a challenge, isn't it? I mean, when you write something, kitty's little tail. When you're writing something, it's in the moment, you're never sure how good it is, and I don't know how good it is, but so far it's turned out okay. So it'll continue to turn out okay.
How long are your books, generally speaking?
The Casts and the Outcasts, I mean, in terms of words, is that word count? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, just as a general rule.
So the Casts and the Outcasts range between, I think, 160 to 175,000 words. William Wilde started out at around 80 to 90,000 words for the first book, and then I think a little north of 100 for book 3, 120 for book 4, and then like 135 for book 5. And then Instrument of Omens is significantly larger. Book 1 was 186,000, book 2 was just a little bit north of 200,000.
So you're talking traditional epic fantasy lengths then?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Instrument of Omens. The rest of the books are equally long.
All right. Well, Doc, the next one is you. If you can get distracted, stop being distracted from the kitty.
You're still muted. There you go.
There. Sorry. Okay. So every universe has its own consistent rules in science, and this is really more of a science one. A magic world. So, what magic can we expect from Testament of Steel, and so spill the beans about it. I'm really.
If I spill the beans, I'll give away all the secrets.
Okay.
I'll spill some of the beans. So, in Cast the Outcast, people know of something called Jivatma, which is actually a Hindu concept. And William Wilde, they use something different called Lorathosca. And in Instrument of Omens, I have to merge the two and explain, are they the same or are they different? And the characters themselves don't know, because we receive wisdom all the time. We're told this is why things work, and we're completely wrong. And they have this understanding that these two things are synonyms. Whether they're right or wrong is explained in Memories of Prophecies, and is explained further in the rest of the series. But I love the notion that we have thousands of years of knowledge that is handed down. We're certain it's correct, and it's totally wrong. Um, and so, this happens all the time in science. It's not just, magic that can go wrong. Science has been wrong so much. For 1,000 years in Western Europe, we used to believe people and look for the four humors. And that was a real form of medicine. It sounds asinine now, but that's what people did for 1,000 years. And even more recently, stomach ulcers, gastric ulcers were considered due to stress. And people were told, just stop being so stressed and your stomach ulcer will go away. And it took a senior house officer from Australia and his consultant to prove that most gastric ulcers actually are the result of a bacterial infection. And that only happened in the 1990s. For 50 years, stomach ulcers were treated with bed rest and antacids and trying to de-stress yourself. But really, it needed an antibiotic. So we were wrong for 50 years. But that was the received wisdom that was taught in medical schools throughout the world about stomach ulcers. So I love playing with that notion that they don't know what's real, that prophecies can be false. And so the magic that you're asking me to explain, some of it comes from the soul, some of it comes from the body, and the two are different. And some of it can be tied together, but it's a large concept that I sort of have to tease out instead of doing an info.
So, is there a specific magic spell or item that you would use, like you, out of all of the ones you created, you go, that's the one I want, and I would use it every day to do X?
Healing. They can heal with the touch, just about anything. I would love to be able to do that. That would be. I know that sounds weird, but it's just.
No, I think it sounds. I totally get it.
Yeah, that's the one I would take. That's the one I would want. I mean, yes, you can make yourself stronger, faster, and become a multi-millionaire in UFC or NFL or whatever. That would be really, really cool. You could, jump 50 feet, maybe even fly. I haven't decided on that yet, but I'd take the healing.
See, I would always find things and have fun using them inappropriately.
Yeah.
But this is why I keep you in business, because I'd probably cut my toes off with a lightsaber. So.
Yeah.
You could definitely use any kind of magic inappropriately. Like if you control wind, there's lots of different things you can do with that. Avatar taught us that.
So, tell us a little bit about. You've talked a bit about the dwarves and the elves. I'm really kind of curious about the trolls.
The trolls. Okay.
You did one troll, and it was so cool.
Yeah, so there's a troll in William Wild, and so he's actually a pretty good player. So I think you mentioned you're on book one. He's not in book one, but he is in book two. So the trolls as a race, you'll read more about them in book two, but they're wise, they're powerful, and they're gentle. But they can be angered, and you want to be careful about angering a troll.
Do they associate themselves with bridges?
Or the internet?
They do not associate with the internet. They don't like bridges because they're too short in general. Trolls are generally over 8 feet tall. And most bridges over those small little streams, they keep hitting their heads on them. And they got ram's horns curling off, and they get them caught in the trellises and stuff. So no, they don't like bridges either.
Okay.
So how many? We're kind of winding down a bit, but how many books do you think will be in this branch of the Anchored World series?
Instrument of Omens?
Mm-hmm.
I think about 7.
Awesome.
But the entire Anchored World, there's so many books I could write. don't know, there's at least 2, 3, 4 series I think still writing. I never expected this. It was when that character, William Wilde, and Cass said, I'm there, that's me, figure it out. And she was very insistent about it. That suddenly I had this, sprawling multiverse that I didn't expect, but it's been a lot of fun tying everything together. But Instruments will have 7 books, I think.
Yeah, I mean, having read the Outcasts and the Cast and the Outcasts, that is very much that character's attitude too. I'm here. Yes, your problem. Figure it out.
Yes, figure it out. Yeah.
So you've got a decent number of the classical creatures from fantasy: the dwarfs, the elves, the trolls. Are there any creatures that you brought into this world that you created on your own?
Yes, the Necrost. I really should have given them a different name so I can make their names clear more easily. Because Necrost is like a past tense word, and the Necrost 6 is the multiple. There's the plural, but they're actually basically shambling. They're not zombies because they're not interested in your brain, but they feed on anything dead. They'll take your eyes if their eyes are going bad. If your arm happens to fit, they'll graft your arm onto their shoulder. And so, in some ways, they're constantly in decay, and they're constantly looking to feed on other magic users and steal their magic to help them heal enough to go steal some body parts.
That's dark. It's sort of like the Reavers almost.
Yeah, in some ways they're a darker version of the Reavers. Yeah.
And that was already pretty dark. So when you created this new creature, like how did you go about doing that? Did you let nature inspire you, or did you just sort of create it out of whole cloth when you were envisioning like what they look like, how they move?
I wanted them to be relentless, so they're incredibly durable. The magic that everybody else has that washes off of them. They're that tough that they don't feel. They can absorb it and keep on coming. So they're like Terminators. So in some ways they're kind of like zombie Terminators. They just, once they've locked onto your darkness, you can really find it to get out of their path. So it was kind of like mix a zombie with the Terminator, and somebody that's constantly sort of falling apart, and they have to steal other body parts to reinvigorate themselves.
Okay, so this interview is winding down. So before we let you go, was there anything about A Testament of Steel that we didn't ask you that you want to tell us before we move on?
I think y'all covered it really well. I mean, I hope that people are interested by what I have to say. Those are going to be given away about. Like, you have Sea Fighters and Thundercats, kind of dummy stuff like this.
I've heard of work things inspiring people. So before we let you go, can you tell the listeners and viewers how they can find you on the wild, wild interwebs?
Sure. I've got a website, www.davisashura.com, which I think I update it every once in a while with the newsletter. But most of the time, if you're looking to get in touch with me, you can either email me through my website at davisashura.com, or more easily, just reach me through Facebook. I have an outlet page, and just look for Davis Ashura there. I think I'm the only one. At least maybe there's others out there now, but it should just be me. And just reach me there. I'm on Twitter also, sort of. Mostly just Facebook. And Instagram, sort of, but mostly just Facebook.
All right. And all of those will be in the show notes. So you can find us, dear listener, on our website at why did I put the W? Anchor.fm/blasters, tack, and tack blades. Anchor.fm/blasters, tack, and tack blades. We're on Twitter at SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. We promise we check it at least once a year. We have a Facebook group, facebook.com/blasters and blades podcast. You can support the show on the Anchor FM site or on buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. And be sure to put for the podcast in the comment section. And that's how we are on the interweb. So, Doc, are you ready to bring this home?
I can definitely bring it home after I remind people that they can also subscribe through Anchor FM. So, JR forgot something. Thank you for spending your precious time with us. For the absentee Nick Garber and the Addlebrain JR Handley, I'm Cisca, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time where we indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, things that go boom, and of course, great literature. Have a great week.